This is an interview with Wendy Greuel on April 19th, 2016 for the Women, Politics, and Activism Project at the Discovery Cube in Los Angeles. The interview is being conducted by Natalie Fusakis. Good morning.
Good morning.
Can you tell me when you were born?
In Encino, California, the San Fernando Valley.
Can you talk a little bit about your childhood and family life growing up?
Well, we didn't move very much. We stayed, lived in a community, which they don't call it that anymore, but it's called Sepulveda in the San Fernando Valley. My family had a building supply and trucking company in the valley, so we were kind of tied to that area. When I was 4 years old, we moved to Granada Hills, which is where my family lived for the next some 30 odd years in Granada Hills. So I grew up and went to the public schools there, Knollwood Elementary, Frost Junior High, and John F. Kennedy High School. And it was really kind of an idyllic, I would say, childhood growing up. My mom did not work up until the age that both of us went into elementary school. I have an older brother who is 3 years older, Weston. And so she stayed at home during that period of time. And my dad worked pretty much 7 days a week. Either the seventh day was usually he'd work at home, but our business was in North Hollywood. And so oftentimes we would go with him on Saturdays when he was working there. And it was a neighborhood where you could ride your bikes, you could walk to school. Now that I have a child, the thought that I would allow him to walk by himself to elementary school seems crazy, but we did at that time.
What's your family's religious background?
So my dad started off as both Presbyterian and then went to a congregational church. And when he went to Hollywood High School and started going to the Congregational Church of Hollywood. And then when he moved out to the San Fernando Valley and bought the first house that we lived in, he was single, he helped start a church in the San Fernando Valley and in Sherman Oaks. And it's called, all of a sudden, Church of the Chimes. Had to think about that for a minute. My parents were actually married at the church. It is still there. But when we moved to Granada Hills, we initially went to a Presbyterian church out in Granada Hills, right there on Zelza, across actually from Granada Hills High School, our competitive high school. But then at a certain time, I learned about what my dad had done in creating this church and where they were married, and encouraged us to kind of go back to that church. And so my junior high and high school, we spent a lot of time at the church. In fact, I went on a mission to the Marshall Islands, Micronesia, when I was in seventh grade. Not the kind of mission where you go when you're recruiting people to go to your religion, but it was congregational across the Marshall Islands, congregational churches. And so we went to a small little island called Rong Rong that we helped build a school. You could only get there by boat. And so a lot of, I think my upbringing was through that experience at that church and with my family, and really kind of a familial experience there at that church.
What was that mission trip like? I mean, that must have been
It was amazing for me because I'd never been gone that long without my parents. And it was, kind of seventh grade, almost through high school kids. And it was pretty incredible. We went to Hawaii. You had to fly to Hawaii first and then take these planes to these various islands, some of them, and the Rong Rong you could only take by boat. And one of the experiences, our plane actually broke down on a base, an army base, and we had to spend the night in the barracks. And that was also a very interesting experience. It was incredible, and I think let me see the world at an early age.
Where were your parents from?
So as I mentioned, my father grew up in Hollywood, and his parents came from just northern kind of Illinois, outside of Chicago, and moved here. My grandfather had a business, worked at the Beverly Hills Building Supply Company before he opened his own business in the San Fernando Valley. And he called it Frontier because the valley was a new frontier when he opened up that business. So my father kind of stayed in this region. My mom grew up in southern Illinois, Harrisburg, Illinois, which is very south, almost to Kentucky. Was a town of about 11,000 people. And my grandfather, her father, was a coal miner. And so there you pretty much got married at 16. She did not. She was an unusual woman in many ways, but she had a genius IQ. She skipped seventh grade, and went to college early at Southern Illinois University at 17. And then she got married when she got there, a few years in, and then got divorced and never finished college. And it was something that she really always regretted, that she never finished college.
And how did she get from Illinois out to California?
She decided, she had been out here with her mother, kind of a small world thing, is that my aunt, my mom's sister, had asthma. And at a certain time, they said she really needed to get away from, in Southern Illinois, all the coal and all that was really causing her trouble. And the best place to move was to Sunland, Tahunga, right up the street from here.
Oh my gosh.
And so they moved out here for about a year. She went to Verdugo Hills High School. Ultimately, they moved back, but during that time, my mom came and visited them for a bit, and then decided to move out here. So she drove her car with a friend and came out here and lived in the kind of La Crescenta area, worked in a doctor's office, and wasn't quite sure what she was going to do, but she worked there for many years, and then met my father, and then decided they moved into the house that he had bought in the San Fernando Valley.
What are your fondest memories of growing up in Granada Hills?
I'd have to say kind of our weekend barbecues in the backyard and swimming in the pool. With our neighbors. We knew all of our neighbors, and it was really, again, a great neighborhood to grow up in. You never really thought of safety issues. You never thought of any of those kinds of problems, and it was really pretty extraordinary. And I thought I was going to go work in the family business. That was kind of what my brother and I both thought we were going to do. But things changed as I had experiences in junior high and high school that made me kind of go in a different direction.
So how engaged in politics were your parents?
They were engaged a little bit on the other side. They were Republicans. My mom, when not in the house, we grew up in Granada Hills, but when we were in Sepulveda, hosted a Congress member at her house and had a coffee. And so they were, I would say, armchair political people. I'd hear them talk about politics. I'd hear them argue about politics, but they were not into politics in any way, shape, or form, in any kind of deep way.
Right.
And although it was very important for them to vote. And my dad was always the first person to vote at his precinct, every time. And because sometimes I would go with him, sometimes, when I was old enough to vote, we would both go. And I still remember, unfortunately, when he passed away, and the first time I went to vote at my old precinct, and they said, "We haven't seen your dad yet," and I said, he passed away, but they remember that he was always the first one. So they taught me the importance of voting, no matter what political party you were in.
So when did you first get involved in politics growing up?
I think probably I'd say junior high. I ran for class officer in junior high, and enjoyed that. It was a way of being engaged. I don't think I enjoyed the campaigning part, which I'll say carried me on through the years. I liked the governing part. So when I went to high school, I ran for office again and ultimately became student body president at Kennedy. And I always give credit to my vice principal who was there. I can't remember her name, but she recommended me for an award that Mayor Tom Bradley gave each year for youth. It was called the Youth Leadership Award. And she said to me, I'm going to recommend you, and here's the application, but I want you to apply. And so I applied and excited. I actually won this award. They awarded, I think, 40 across the city of LA. And I remember going down to City Hall with my parents and going up to the tower in City Hall. I'd never been in City Hall before. And meeting the mayor, which was pretty incredible. You know, he was this big 6'5" guy who was very warm and personable, and he shook your hand, and you know your hand felt so small in that big hand. And part of what they did when they gave you that award is they gave you a folder that had an application to be part of the mayor's youth council, and it was like high school to college. And so I decided, I'll apply. You know, I'll apply to be on the youth council. Lo and behold, I became a member of the mayor's youth council, and for 2 years served on the council while I was at UCLA. And then they offered me an internship, a paid internship program, which my dad, although was happy about because I was getting paid, I also had been working for him when I was at college. So I ended up not being able to work as much in the business as I had previously. But it was really a fabulous experience where I learned not only about government, because that's part of what we did, but I also learned about different parts of the city that I'd never been part of. And I always laugh because the year that I won that award of the 40 kids, there was only 42 applications because I saw it after I ultimately was responsible for those youth awards when I became a paid intern. But I always tell the story about kind of a change in my life, because I went to UCLA as a psychology major. And then I changed to an econ major because I thought that would be helpful in the business side and working with my parents' business. I interned for Joel Wachs, whose seat I ultimately took as a city council member. And then interned for the mayors as part of that as well. And when my first boss, Olivia Mitchell, said one day, I need a ride. She was a single mom, did not have a car. She took the bus every day. Some nights she could get a city car to be able to go to these meetings that she was staffing, but other times she didn't. So she'd either take the bus or try to get a ride. So she asked me, would I give her a ride? She kind of asked the group, would anyone be able to? And I was like, I have a car, I can give you a ride, and I don't have to be back to UCLA till later tonight. And so I drove her to this meeting in South LA. I was the only Caucasian in the room, talking about some really tough issues that my eyes opened. And I talk about that being my journey and the turning point where I said, I like the fact that as an elected official or in government, I don't even think at that time I was not thinking about running for office, but that government can have an impact in people's lives, whether you live in South LA or you live in the San Fernando Valley. And so I got a taste of what that would be like. And so every night I would drive Olivia to another meeting in another place of the city, and it got me hooked. And at the same time, between my sophomore year and my junior year, I did an internship in Washington, D.C. for the city of Los Angeles. They have an office there, a lobbyist, and it made it even kind of a deeper connection. And I tell young people who are thinking about going into politics that those experiences in college helped me decide what I wanted to do, and that you sometimes go in thinking you have a path, and all of a sudden something else happens. And then the other message I give them is, do anything you possibly can to learn as much as you can. And that means photocopying that, we used to call it Xeroxing, and that you would look at everything that was in the Xerox machine. You could read it, you would learn from that and why. And I used to go on the 3rd floor to Xerox stuff. We were on the 22nd floor of City Hall. And I would go on the 3rd floor because that's where the mayor's office was, and the press office, and lots was happening. And so I would go and, duplicate things down there. And the press secretary, who ultimately became my friend, kept asking me, why are you down here? She was a few years older than me. What are you doing down here? Well, I'm Xeroxing. Well, we are busy down here, why? And I had my own plan, which was I was going to get to hear and see everything that was happening. And when I was in Washington, D.C., I would offer to pick up the elected officials on the Sunday night from Dulles, because that was the only place they could fly in. And then I'd have an hour to talk to them and ask them questions between when I picked them up and dropped them off. And so it's a message I give to kids that says, just do everything you possibly can. You will learn from it no matter what.
Before we move forward too much more, what do you remember about your high school years at Kennedy High?
It was great. You know, people always ask you, what's your favorite time of your school? You know, people say, oh, my college. Mine was high school. It was, for me, just an amazing time because I think I came into my own. I wasn't as shy as I used to be. I was active in student government. I was captain of the cheerleading squad, you know, but it was just an opportunity where I learned so much and the kinds of friends that I had. We were at a school too that was one of the first to have busing. So we had a diverse school and it just really, I think, gave me a great foundation, and the teachers that I had helped me along my pathway and stay in touch with some of them. Even today, one who I saw on the subway when I was still an elected official, and I would take the subway to work as much as I possibly could. Right. And he was my accounting teacher, and he says, "Are you Wendy Greuel?" And so it was very funny. But I think your teachers and the education that you have is so important, and that they leave an imprint on you. And so my high school years were great. I do remember a fourth grade teacher, Mrs. Gugas, and Mrs. Gugas sent me a letter when I worked for Tom Bradley. Again, I feel so old now, but that was like way before the computers were, anyone had them. And she sent me this letter and says, I don't know if this is the same Wendy Greuel that I had in fourth grade, but she had read my paper she read my name in the paper on an issue, on the AIDS issue, where I was quoted, because that was one of the things I did for Tom Bradley, was work on that issue. And she said, but if it's the same Wendy Greuel, I knew someday you would be somebody, and that I would be able to read your name in the paper, and I would love to connect with you. And of course, I read it to my mom, who started crying, you know, and she thought that was just amazing. So I called Mrs. Gugas, and she came down for lunch at City Hall, and then I had her meet the mayor, and oh my gosh, she was, you know, excited about that. But, you know, I think in each grade I had a teacher who helped me along the way and inspired me in one way or another. But I think my high school was a lot of fun. A lot of fun. Now, I didn't know about what I wanted to be after that or go to college again. I thought I was going to go in the family business. And I only applied to one college, which today you would never do that. And I applied to UCLA, and today I would never get into UCLA. With the grades you have to have and all that. Right. But it was kind of the place I wanted to go.
Yeah. I was going to ask you why you selected it, but you've mentioned a couple, but are there any other role models that you had growing up? And if so, who?
Well, I definitely think my mom was one of those that always taught me that I could do anything I wanted to do, and that there were no barriers to being able to do that. Olivia Mitchell was definitely as my first boss. Another boss I had was Grace Montañez Davis, who similarly, she was the deputy mayor that I worked for in the mayor's office. And Grace was another one who went out every night to events and always invited me to go with her. And so I all of a sudden kind of got engaged in the Latino community and Olivia was African American, you know, she had taken me to the African American community that I was experiencing and seeing parts of the city through both of those women who chose to mentor me and to take me under their wing.
That's great. So while you were at UCLA, you were interning. Were you involved in politics at all on campus? Or
you know, interestingly enough, it was not, and I don't have a really good reason why. I think it was because I was working in the family business and interning and doing all that. I was in a sorority. So when I looked at all of that and studying, it wasn't as much, I didn't care as much about that as far as running for something within student government. I followed it. So I lived on campus for 2 years. I lived in Sproul Hall, and then I lived in the sorority house for 2 years as well.
So did your major end up being economics in the end, or?
No, my major ended up being political science. So when I came back from Washington, D.C., I changed my major to political science. I had some catching up to do. My parents were very gracious and paid for college, but said to me, 4 years, done. If it's over 4 years, you have to start paying for college. It was at a time that my internship, I was able to get 12 units for that internship and writing a 20-page paper, which was pretty incredible to be able to do that. And graduated in that 4 years at poli-sci.
Right. So when you were done with college, at that point, did you know for sure you were politically, going to go work in government?
It was what, I kind of fell into it. And so right after college, Olivia Mitchell offered me a full-time job. And would I come and work for her? And so I was like, wow. So I did. I started, I graduated on a Friday, and Monday I started working for Olivia. I again look back at certain things. If I could do them over again, I would have gone, to Europe or traveled or done whatever. But I'm a workaholic, which is kind of a theme in my life. But and so I worked for her for that first year. And I thought again. So she ran the Mayor's Office of Youth Development. And in our office was not only the Mayor's Youth Advisory Council, but youth leadership training programs that we did, and the Mayor's Advisory Committee on Childcare. And then a little bit of everything else, but those were the responsibilities we had. We had a small unit, 4 or 5 people that worked there. And my responsibility was both the Youth Council, since I'd been a member, and the Mayor's Advisory Committee on Child Care, and then helping and staffing these leadership training programs we did in continuation high schools across the city. And that was, again, another eye-opener. I didn't even know that continuation high schools existed when I was in high school. And really a crowd of kids that you wanted to help save. This was kind of, they were no longer in the regular school, and this was their kind of last step. And so we went in and went and spoke to their classes, and brought public speakers in, had Saturday afternoon things, and it was great. It was a really wonderful year working there. And then,
and what was this, 80?
This would have been 83.
Okay.
So it was 83 to 84. There were lots of things we were doing on Olympics. We were volunteering because of the 1984 Olympics. Obviously, the mayor was running for governor as well, so that was a big year. So I volunteered on that part of it as well. And then I think it was about a year into that job that Grace Montañez Davis offered me a position to work for her, to move down, from the 22nd floor down to the mezzanine. And it was one of the experiences that was really tough for me, I have to say, because I was very loyal to my boss, Olivia, who had done so much for me. And it was an experience that I also learned about how to deal with someone who wants to leave you and go to that next step. Because Olivia was very dependent on me. We had, again, long time relationship. It was from my high school to that, 5 years. And I think another staff member was leaving, and she didn't want me to leave, so she said, "You can't leave. You can't take the job." And I was like, "But I really want this job. It's such a great opportunity to be an assistant to the deputy mayor and work on issues that I care about, and it seems like the natural progression." And so that afternoon, she told Grace Montañez Davis, "You can't have her," and Grace accepted that. And that night we went to dinner, and she told me that that's what happened.
Right.
And I was very upset, but I was 23 years old, and how do you do that? How do you it's just been taken out of your hands.
Right.
So lo and behold, I walked back to City Hall. It's 9 o'clock at night, and we'd gone to dinner close by, and Grace Davis was getting in her car. And she said, "I'm so sorry that it, didn't work out." And I said, "Well, I'm really sorry because I didn't have a voice in this. I didn't have a choice. I really would like it. And I hope at some point, it was a very nice conversation. But I was sick to my stomach about it all. In fact, I didn't go to work the next day. I didn't feel well. And I got a call at home from another gentleman who worked in the mayor's office who said, "I understand this happened. If you would like the job, you can take the job." And so I was like, "Oh, I don't know what to do, But I decided I really wanted the job. And I told Olivia that I would, give a month's notice. I would only be downstairs. I would help as much as I possibly could. But it put a very big strain on our friendship. And it was hard. And so I went downstairs to my new job and worked as hard as I could on everything I needed before I left. And then because of political infighting in the mayor's office, there was a new chief of staff who told Grace she had no authority to hire me. So I was almost going to be without a job. But it all worked out. I was able to stay, and that was fine. And Olivia and I, have been fast friends, forever, and that was a thing of the past. But I tell that story in this whole history because I think she was fairly young at the time as well, and losing someone. And how do you encourage people to go on and yet make sure that you can do what you need to do in your job, and also advise people like this is a good job for you or it's not. And that early lesson helped me as a manager later in life for some of the employees I had, and how to deal with them. And some I would say, this is not your job that you're going to go to. You can take it if you want to, but I will tell you that staying with me, you're going to get to do more, and here's why. And then others I'd say, you've got to take that job. It's a great job for you. Go for it. I will support you. I'm unhappy you're leaving me, but I will deal with it. And my saying also used to be was, you can leave me, but you always work for me no matter where you go. So I'd make them repeat that. Anyway, so I worked for Grace Davis for many years.
And what did you do during this phase of your what were you doing in the
So
mayor's office?
we kind of had this social issues on our side, how the staff was, there were 2 deputy mayors at that time. And one was chief of staff and one was Grace, who had some of the departments, the community development department, the human services, all those, I'll call them more the touchy-feely, but they were real job training, they were real stuff, but they were not transportation, finance, all that. That was on the other side. So for a long time I assisted her, and some of them were my issues that I kind of had ownership to, and others were hers. Ultimately, she left, and I kind of assumed a lot of those responsibilities. I was also the grants coordinator for the city, which meant every grant that the city applied for that needed city council approval came to me. And some people look in the archives and go, are you the same Wendy Greuel that I found some document from 1985 that had, attention Wendy Greuel? I said, yes, that was me, because they all came through me, and then forwarded on to city council and then signing back. And so I worked on the issues of AIDS, homelessness, childcare, immigration issues at the time. And the mayor used to say, Wendy has all the unsolvable social issues. I'm gonna send it to Wendy, which was fine. I mean, it was probably, and when I talked to my old bosses, Mark Fabiani was chief of staff at one point, and Dee Dee Myers was press secretary at some point there. We talked fondly about that really being some of the best years of our careers. We had a great team of people. It was kind of like the chalkboard. Whatever you wanted to do, you wrote it up and you got to do it. And the mayor was very, very encouraging in doing that, very much so.
What do you feel like were some of the things you really accomplished while you were working on these issues at the time?
Oh, I have to say quite a few, and I think that's probably why I feel so warm about that time, which was the first AIDS policy for the city of Los Angeles. We created the City-County AIDS Task Force because the county refused to have an AIDS task force or any commission in the mid-80s. So Ed Edelman and Tom Bradley said, enough is enough. This is a really important issue, and we're going to stand up and create this. And so I staffed that. And Judge Ran Schrader, who was such an amazing guy, and so many, unfortunately, most of the people who were on that task force have passed away of AIDS. But we did some extraordinary things about making sure that dentists, had masks on, and that there were, where it was okay that it, kind of talking about transmission does not occur from talking to somebody, and so it was really both sides. Also was instrumental in creating LA's best after-school program, which his legacy and our creation of that has lived on. We started at 10 schools in 1988, and I think there's 194 schools now across the city of Los Angeles. On the homeless issue, we created the LA Homeless Service Authority, which I now serve on. Again, it's kind of a full circle. I serve on the commission. When we sued the county of Los Angeles on the issue of homelessness because we felt they were not doing enough. And part of the settlement was this creation of a interagency, a joint county city entity that would help deal with the issue and trying to get funding for that. Those are some of the things that I feel like there was a long-lasting impact that I had on ways in which, and instrumental in creating the first city's childcare center, which is named the Picus Center because we worked with the federal government to get the funding and the property with Judge Harry Pregerson, and then sent it to the council for them to kind of finalize and fund and do all that. So it really was a great project. So there were a lot of things that I got to do then as a young person. And that's what I loved most about Tom Bradley, is it didn't matter what your age was. He was gonna, push you along and encourage you to do things. A lot of my work ethic came from my time in the mayor's office, in addition to my mom and my dad. My mom ultimately went back to work, and they were kind of worked 24/7.
What did your mom end up doing when she went back to work?
She worked at Kaiser Permanente for many years in clinic records, and she also worked as an insurance investigator. And I remember, again, old days, and she would carry the duplicator that you would have, so that you literally put it in and you would roll it, and it was a heavy thing. And she would pick me up at school, and then I would go with her, after that. I did give her a hard time, because I remember she was late all the time, Again, another time where they would never do that today, but everyone was gone and I was sitting out front, waiting for my mom to come pick me up. But they both kind of taught me that if you want to accomplish things in life, you really have to work hard, and you have to do, as I've said earlier, what it takes to do that. But Tom Bradley would come in on every Saturday morning and work. He'd get there at 7:30 on a dot. He'd go out to events all the rest of the day, but he would come in for at least a couple hours. And the trick in the office was to get things passed, him to get him to approve it. So you'd put it in the box and you'd wait for it and you'd wait for it. And so I developed a really great strategy. I would be the last one to leave him Friday night, and I would put my memo on top of his box. And so he would then in the morning take that box into his office and he'd start from the top. And I would every Monday morning get them back. And if I had to talk to him, I would happen to just walk down on the third floor and see that he was there, and I'd knock and I'd get my answer. So everyone would go, "How did you get that back so fast?" And I was like, "Well, I learned how to do it." The guys who used to clean, the janitors, used to say to me that I would never get married because the only people I was meeting at night was them. And although they were great guys, they were too old for me, and I could do better, they said. So when I wasn't there, they'd be like, "You must be dating someone because you weren't here till 11 the night before."
Oh, that's funny. What were some of the biggest challenges that LA was facing in those years when you were in the mayor's office?
Some that are not, I have to say, that different than we face today. Homelessness being one of them. It was not as bad as we see it today, but it was growing, and particularly in Skid Row. You didn't see it across the city of LA. And there was the same battles of wanting to have a revitalized downtown and yet have a population who lived there, whether they were on the streets or they were living in the SRO housing that were there. I think the other issue was, of course, transportation and traffic, and the fact that Mayor Bradley pushed really hard against all odds to create the transportation system that we had, as limited as it was until 20 years later, when they lifted some of the restrictions on being able to have a subway down Wilshire and some of the other things that occurred post that, but had a vision that transportation was one of them. And obviously I was there during the 1992 riots, which was probably one of the saddest days of my life. And I think Tom Bradley would have said the same thing. For all that had been created and so much, not only death, but the wreckage that occurred in those neighborhoods that many people had worked to rebuild. I remember driving down with a friend of mine, Laura Bell, who had been active in community development, economic development, and did housing for the mayor. And we went down on Saturday morning. We felt safe that we could drive down there on Saturday morning. The riots had been Wednesday night. And we cried because we saw housing projects that she'd built that had been burned to the ground, grocery stores that had been, looted, that had again been part of the revitalization. And so I think the economic disparity that we also again see in Los Angeles today. So the issues are not that much different. And I think that we have to learn from things that worked in the past and things that didn't. I think we have probably more resources today than we did in the past.
So how did you end up going to work for the Clinton administration not so long after, in 1993?
Kind of by chance. So Tom Bradley had announced that he was not going to run for re-election. He'd obviously served as the longest mayor, served 5 terms as mayor of Los Angeles. And I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And a number of my friends, including, Dee Dee Myers, had helped on the campaign. And so we were all talking about, we should go to Washington, D.C. and work for Clinton. And so we got the Plum Book, which is a book, I think it still gets printed every year, which is of all the political positions within the federal government that the President of the United States has the authority to hire. And so because I was so involved in housing and homelessness, I looked at HUD, what could I do? And there are all kinds of things within there that I thought about in housing or economic development. And so I sent off my resume to be considered. And lo and behold, it must have been February or March of that year after the president had been elected, Ron Brown, who was Secretary of Commerce, and Assistant Secretary for HUD, Andrew Cuomo, came out to LA. And unfortunately, Tom Bradley couldn't be there that day, but it was about what we were doing post-riot. It was just a year after the riots. We needed more money from the federal government. There were lots of things that we had lobbied for. And so Mark Fabiani, who was chief of staff, and I and a couple other people made presentations and kind of organized the trip. And so Mark and I had figured out that he would hand to Ron Brown a letter from the mayor that would attach my resume, because I was also looking at commerce, as a position, possibly. So mayor had written a letter, Mark had his little thing, and all planned that at some point he would hand it to Ron. So we're sitting in this meeting and each of us are making presentations, and at the end of Mark's, he says, thank you so much, and I just have something from the mayor he'd like you to have. Didn't say what it was or anything, and then hands it over to me to make my presentation on post-riot activities that we had done and the kind of demands that we wanted or asks that we had. Of course, Ron Brown immediately opens the envelope. I know what's in the envelope. He's reading the resume and the letter while I'm giving my presentation, nervous enough as I am presenting to a Secretary of Commerce, and hands it to Andrew Cuomo. And Andrew looks at me, and I'm thinking, I'm dead. I'm never going to get this job. It's how embarrassing that is that they handed it at that moment and opened it. So lo and behold, a week goes by, Andrew Cuomo calls me. So I know you're interested in homeless issues. I'd love you to come talk to me about maybe a job, moving to DC. At the same time, Ron Brown had also had someone call me, and we were looking at. But I went back and met Andrew Cuomo, and he said, "You have to come." He's very convincing. Yes, very convincing. So 3 weeks later, I moved to Washington D.C. And had left my condo, was getting it rented, and moved back to Washington D.C. and was working on homeless programs nationally for the Clinton administration when Henry Cisneros was Secretary of HUD.
So how hard was it to leave the mayor's office after those?
It was hard because it was such a family. I mean, it really was. And I'd been there 10 years just as a staff member, not even being on the mayor's council and whatever. So that was all I'd known, and had this wonderful support system. It was a big leap for me to go back there and to do that. But I loved it, and it was a wonderful experience. It was tough. I mean, Andrew Cuomo is a tough person to work for because he's demanding, as he is now, and that's why he's great at being an elected official, because he demands the most of you. But for me, what happened is a year later, I happened to be in Los Angeles with Henry Cisneros. We announced $10 million grant to Mayor Reardon, City of Los Angeles, to this new homeless authority that we'd created, $10 million. And so I stayed the weekend. I was dating someone in LA. And Monday morning was Martin Luther King's holiday, and I was going to fly to, I think it was New Orleans, to give a speech. And the earthquake occurs. And so I get a call from Andrew's chief of staff saying, Henry Cisneros is going to be on his way, literally momentarily, flying out to Los Angeles. You need to meet him. Well, if someone else give your speech in, New Orleans. And so I met him in Burbank, and because they said, look, you know the Valley, you have a good relationship with Mayor Reardon, who also offered me a job to stay, but to stay in the mayor's office. I had already gone to work for Andrew, or accepted it from Andrew. So 6 weeks I was living here, doing all of the coordination of what HUD was doing. Was over $1 billion in this region. And Henry stayed for 10 days. So I was driver, I did public relations, I did policy, I did all of that. And so they said, you know Los Angeles. We don't have anyone in Southern California who's a political person who knows LA. We're going to start ramping up campaigns. We have a lot of things that are going to happen in California. We could really use your eyes and ears. And so I moved back to Los Angeles, and I had a couple positions, but then I oversaw all of Southern California, LA, San Diego, and Santa Ana offices for HUD.
It must have been kind of chaotic after the earthquake, I would imagine.
It was, and making sure they spent the money and how it was the best way to spend it, and people were judging, did you get the housing built? It was exciting though, and the experience that I had, and the kind of literally face-to-face kinds of interaction I had with the elected officials to all of the federal officials really gave me an incredible opportunity. And working closely with Mayor Reardon at the time and how to do it was the right thing.
And what else did you enjoy about being this sort of Southern California? I don't know, was it a regional director? What job? I don't know.
So yeah, it was called. We created this position actually because Art Agnos was the regional director, but he did not in San Francisco. But he was going to maybe run for mayor again, and he did not want to spend any time in Southern California, and he didn't have ambitions of wanting to run statewide. He just thought, you know what, Wendy, there's so much happening down in Southern California. I'm going to delegate it all to you. So it was great because I had a lot of independence, but I also, was connected to Washington and what was happening, but I was here in California. And I think my experience of living in DC for a year and a half to 2 years showed me that I loved Los Angeles. I loved California. And this is where I ultimately, wanted to be at that time.
Right. So why did you end up leaving HUD and ending up moving back into the private sector, which seems like it would have been your sort of first major move into the private sector?
It was again not anticipated. I got a call from a friend of mine who said, Andy Spahn at DreamWorks is looking for somebody to come in and do kind of political and civic engagement and philanthropy, and I've recommended you. And I was like, I don't know anything about the entertainment industry, and I don't really want, I talk to people, I don't want to go in and be a permit person, there's some people that just do, get permits for them to film
right.
in different locations. I don't want to do that. And so I was like, but DreamWorks Studios, maybe that's a good thing to do. And at the same time, I was being recruited by Andrew Cuomo to come back to Washington. He had just become Secretary of HUD, and he wanted me to come back. And I was like, I don't know if I want to come back. And the small world of this is Bill de Blasio, of course, is now mayor of New York, was the regional director in New York. So, and we were friends at HUD. And so Andrew was trying to get him to do the same thing, leave the regional position at HUD in New York and come back down to Washington, D.C. So I remember Bill called me and he goes, "What are you going to do?" I said, "I don't think I want to go." And he goes, "I don't either." And he goes, "I want to run for something someday." And I said, "Oh, I'm not sure if I want to run, but if I do, you can't run for Washington. You got to run from the place you are." So we both made these decisions. And oddly enough, how our careers kind of matched along the years. But I went and met with Andy, and he talked about the difference you can make in the private sector and what kind of company DreamWorks was going to be, and that this was in the beginning, and we were going to build Playa Vista, we were building the Glendale studios, and what great opportunity it would be. And we hit it off right away. He pretty much offered me the job. I was kind of unsure, but thought how exciting it was going to be. He did joke with me. He goes, "I didn't know you before, Wendy." He said, "But everyone I've talked to has said you are the perfect person for this job, and so must be fate that you should come and have this job." So I left HUD, much to the chagrin of Andrew, who was not happy with me. But I told him, as I have subsequently, I will be helpful to you in your career as you go forward, even probably more so when I'm at DreamWorks Studios and doing that. And of course, we did a fundraiser for him and all that when he was running for the next office. But DreamWorks was, really a fabulous place to work. I loved the team. I loved, Spielberg, Katzenberg, and Geffen were just incredible.
And so, what kinds of things did you do for DreamWorks while you were there?
We did a little bit of everything. So we didn't have titles at DreamWorks. That was there also. We are different than everywhere else. We are not going to have a title. Our department was, kind of loosely called corporate affairs. So one thing I did was the political side with Andy. So the fundraisers. So if Steven Spielberg said, "I'm going to do an event for Bill Clinton or Hillary Clinton or Al Gore," that's what we would do. We would put the event together and we would raise the money. And that was something I had never done. Of all the things I was asked to do, I had never done fundraising. And that was a great learning experience and actually set me up in a way that I was able to actually run for office ultimately, because I kind of knew how to ask and who to ask. And then the process in doing that was all learned there at DreamWorks. Additionally, the philanthropic giving that we did from DreamWorks, I was able to do. We helped start a nonprofit that was doing job training of getting new people in. It was called Workplace Hollywood, new people into the industry, diversifying the industry. I did a lot of land use related items when we were working to get Playa Vista up and running. And then dealing a lot with some of the filming. I still did the permitting things that we had to do every now and then. It wasn't my day job. We had somebody who did that. But when there was a problem and they needed political help, I remember we were doing a movie in Georgia called Road Trip. Not the highest level, it was literally college students going on a road trip, and you can only imagine what trouble they got into. And the school that they were at had just gotten off the top 10 party list, and they were very happy that they were no longer on that list, but they were filming on this university. And they said, "Sorry, you can't film here anymore. We don't want to have anything to do with a particular movie that is highlighting kind of a party school." And they'd spent a lot of money and time, and they called me, "You've got to get involved," So we spoke to the governor, we spoke to the mayor of the city, we spoke to the chancellor of the university, and we, created an opportunity where no iconic buildings would be shown in the movie, that they would give no credit to the university on the film. They would teach some classes and have some extra, whatever they wanted to do, but we were able to get that film, which saved us a lot of money and time, but that was quite an experience to get everyone to move in a very short period of time to accept them to film on that particular place. Or when we were filming, wanting to land a plane in China, and having to communicate with them to land our plane with our animators and so forth to be there, and Jeffrey's plane, which they don't let that many private planes land. Or when we were doing the movie Spirit, and Jeffrey Katzenberg wanted to make sure that the animators had the experience of horses running in the wild and to see some of the most beautiful parks in our country, and do it in 4 days. And so working with the Park Service and being able to land helicopters and which we could not, certain places. But it was always something new and exciting, and getting to meet probably every politician that wanted Jeffrey or David or Stephen to do something. They came to see us. And so I got to sit in with most of those, which was really, really a treat.
So what was the most challenging thing about that job?
I would say that the challenging part was somewhat expectations on both sides, and expectations from the community at large that you have these three guys and you have DreamWorks and we should fund everything that occurs in the city. And Andy told me when he hired me, 90% of the time you have to say no. There's only 10% you get to say yes. And we were very clear about DreamWorks was a company and the three guys had their own things, and sometimes you could convince them that it was a dual purpose. But the company was new. We didn't have all this. So how did we engage with people in a way that demonstrated we were committed, but we didn't have a whole lot of money to give away necessarily? And then I would say the other thing that I learned, and I don't know what to say, it was frustrating, was the private sector, which I always said made me a better politician, elected official, was being in the private sector, both through my family business and through corporate, which was they wanted it yesterday. You should have anticipated that I needed that done today. I mean, it was that kind of, we've got to get it done. And I was a lot of times talking to the city about things that usually take a long time, but was able to maneuver and get things done, and it really was helpful over the years. So that was a great part of it. But I enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun.
So you were at DreamWorks when you decided to run for city council.
Yes.
So what made you to decide that was the moment to do it?
As I said earlier, I don't think I ever really thought I would necessarily run. And I'll tell you why, for a couple of reasons. Same reasons why women don't run today. I mean, it's I was 40 and single when I was working at DreamWorks and decided to run. I always wanted to get married and have children, and thought running for office would probably not be the best way to do that. Two, raising money, that I had never done that. I was the public policy wonk, at HUD and working for Tom Bradley. I dabbled in the political side of it, but it wasn't my everyday job. I was really the policy person. I was writing those policy papers. I was, getting the problem solved. That was really what I did. So, excuse me, I never thought that was the direction I was going to go in. And all of a sudden, Joel Wachs decides to retire earlier than his term. And again, in the back of my head, my friends had been telling me, you should run one day, you should run, you'd be perfect, blah, blah, blah. I kept saying, no, I'm never gonna run, never gonna run. And then he decides to leave office early, and my phone started ringing. And people said, this is your time. You live in the district, you should do this, you've learned how to fundraise, the issues, you should run. And I was like, wow, I don't know, I'm not sure. And I went and talked to Andy, and I said, I'm being encouraged to run. And he encouraged me. He said, I don't want you to go, but we will support you no matter what you do. And it was a special election, so that made it desirable too. It was in a 6-month period of time that I was running. My mother, who had taught me, you can do anything, you're independent, said to me, I'll support you, but let me tell you some of the things I think won't happen. Like, you won't get married, you won't have children, just figure that out as part of it. And so I bit the bullet, and I decided to run for office. And I called my friends and I said, look, I need you. If I'm going to do this, I need a kitchen cabinet of friends who are going to be my, bounce things off of, be my support group, whatever. I don't have anybody. And my father, unfortunately, had already passed away. And my brother and mother were like, not political. And I'm going to need you to help. And they did. They stepped up to the plate. And then, of course, 2 weeks later, I met my now husband in the middle of this campaign, the beginning of the campaign.
So how did you meet your husband? That was inherent in the questions I had. So
that's right. I had seen him, and I told a story. I had seen him 3 months earlier at an event across the room. He had gray hair, I thought he was a nice-looking older guy. Never met him across the room. It was some other event. I wasn't thinking of running for office, anything. I was at DreamWorks happily, just about ready to turn 40, but never met him. I'm now at this event 2 weeks into my campaign, an event that John Burton was having at Sherry Lansing's home in the backyard, and I look across this backyard and I was like, that's the guy. That's the guy I saw 3 months ago. So I'm in the, I need to meet everybody. I kind of in my head said he could be a voter, a donor, or a date. And he became all three for me. And so I walked up to him and said, hi, I'm Wendy Greuel. I'm running for office. And we exchanged cards. And he invited me to lunch. And we had a lunch. And he expensed the lunch because he wasn't sure if it was like a date or it was something because I was at DreamWorks or whatever. So, and then we started to date. And he went through, there's nothing like a trial by fire in dating someone who is walking precincts, raising money, spending their whole, any free time that I wasn't working at DreamWorks was campaigning. And he was there. He was there through thick and thin, through all of it, to be able to help.
So what made Dean stand out from everyone else that you dated?
He was mature, sure of himself, was not afraid of an independent woman who had a career and wanted to do what she wanted to do. Because I had so many people that I dated, not that many that I dated, but that I would date that loved that I was working for the mayor or working for DreamWorks. But then about 3 months in, they'd be, well, how come you have to go to that? Why do you have to do that? I was like, well, that's who I am. That's what I do. That's what I enjoy doing. So he was very supportive of all of that. And it just kind of suddenly, it clicked about what our values were, what we wanted to do in life. He had grown up in a family that had been political, not his immediate family, but his uncle in St. Louis and Missouri. And so he kind of got it. And within 3 months, he said to me, when can I ask you? And I was like, I don't know if I'm ready for this. I said, after the primary. After the primary, that's December 11th. So we got engaged December 22nd, I think it was. Yeah, December 22nd. And then got married 3 months after the election. It was a whirlwind year and a half.
I was going to say. So what do you remember most about this first campaign?
I was scared. I was really scared. And because I was running against a sitting elected official that had been a sitting assembly member. The president of the city council was supporting him. The LA County Democratic Party was supporting him. The COPE, the labor endorsed, is supporting him. And we joked because the first poll we did, he had a 40% name ID and I had a 4%. And I said, those 4% of people were just embarrassed to say they had no idea who I was. Because I'd never run, They also told me, my opponent, some of my opponent's spokespeople said, it's not your turn. Why don't you wait? This is Tony's turn. You can run in a year. We don't think you run, and we're going to beat you. And I was like, I'm in this. I am in this to win. I'm going to do what I need to do. And I believed in my gut, and I did everything possible. I won that race by 225 votes out of 30,000. I came in second in the primary and then won in the general. I didn't know I'd won for 10 days. Excruciating. And so, I walked and talked to people. I walked precincts every day. I raised money for as many hours as I could, and then I would go out and I would walk precincts and I would do the debates and whatever. And it was it was something that was invigorating and exciting at some times, and other times, like I said, scared, nervous.
Yeah. So what do you think was the key to you pulling off the win?
I think it's a couple things. One, I stayed competitive on the money side. Two, I had enough endorsements of people who represented kind of the communities and others, like I had a Laura Chick, who was well respected in the San Fernando Valley. I had a Democratic Party, the LA County Young Dems, so I had to, show that piece of it. I had Republicans who actually supported me, that because this had both, it's a nonpartisan race, so you needed both. And some of those last-minute endorsements helped me as well. And I think, and I say this to women who are running for office, I was willing to do what it takes to be tough. I didn't pull any punches. I stood up because the polling showed. Wendy Greuel is great, Tony Cardenas is great. That's what you would, they read these statements about each of them. I lose. Tony Cardenas is great, and here's some of the things about Tony that Wendy differs with. Here's Wendy, here's some of the things that Tony would say about Wendy. I could win. And it's often a reason why women don't get in, because they're like, I'm not going to go negative, as they call it, or I'm not going to do that comparison. I'm going to stay positive, You don't always win in that way. And so you have to be able to say, I'm going to show the difference between us. And we did that. That was tough. Some of those mailers my campaign consultant sent, I wouldn't send. And I changed. Right. Others, I was like, okay. And I knew there would be, blowback or whatever it was, but it was all right because they were doing it on the other side, worse. And I think, in fact, Tony Cardenas and I have become friends, and he, jokes about the one mailer that someone did that he thought, really turned off some of the women who might have voted for him. They ended up voting for me. So you have to be really careful in how you do that. But I think that was for me, it was the hard work and really that knocking on doors and talking to people. So it takes every little piece.
So when you finally found out 10 days later that you won, how did you feel? What did you think?
Well, I was relieved. I was exhausted. And it was funny because the county only counts ballots on Tuesdays and Fridays. So Wednesday morning at 3:30 in the morning, I was up 55 votes. On Friday, they counted again. I was up 292. So my campaign consultant said, you've won. There's no way it's going to change. He just has to concede. Even though there's a couple more thousand votes to count, the trends are in your favor. So I was kind of happy that weekend, but, holding back. On Tuesday, it went down to 210 or something like that. And I was like, oh no, so even though they were, kind of confident. And on that Friday, the last Friday they counted, they called our offices and said, we need a representative from your team, and we've called Tony Cardenas for representative of his team, to come down to the LA County Recorder's Office to open a box. That's all they said to us, to open a box. Now I'm thinking a box of ballots, and I'm screwed, something's gonna happen that's gonna make this. So my campaign person goes down there and they open the box, and it is one of the machines that they use for voting. And because someone had complained and said, Tony and Wendy were not on my ballot, I didn't see them on my ballot, they had to take that machine from that place and make sure that we were on the ballot. And the challenge had been, this was a statewide election, and so there were so many things on the ballot. We were the last thing on the ballot. The person didn't go to the end. So I had a few hiccups of hard text kind of along the way, but was relieved and excited about being able to be elected and to be able to do all the things I talked about.
So what do you remember about your early days on the city council?
It was stressful, and I'll tell you why, because there was redistricting occurring. And there were several maps that were floating around that would change my district. And of course, your district obviously determines whether you can win or lose your next election. And because I filled a vacancy by Joel Wachs, I had to run again in a year. So I was very concerned about what, in that year. So there was one map that was going to give me a 75% new district as of July 1st. So I would have a brand new district on July 1st that I was going to be running in 9 months later. Another one that gave me a 50% new district. Still not great, but concern. And there were a lot of people who were fighting to have the 75%.
Why was that?
they wanted to create a new valley a new section in the middle, and it was, Jack Weiss wanted something. I mean, it was all politics, and it was all about who wanted what. And so here I am, actually even before I was sworn in, having to deal with this issue. And I finally, convinced the commission to go my way. I had an opponent who wanted to have the 75% new district, and told me that there was no way. My proposal for the only 50% was dead on arrival. And I was like, I don't think so. And so I in an early point in my career, proved to them that I could do what it took to win, and I think the vote was 18-4 in getting the district to be only a 50% new district. So I had to hit the ground running. And then the second part was I had an issue as to when the district was actually going to be in place. So unfortunately, some wanted to delay the implementation of the redistricting for a year until they came out of office. Ruth Glanter. Yeah. And I totally understand why she would want to do that. I completely understood. However, I understood the other side of it, which was the city attorney was saying to me, it's illegal to delay it for a year. And then from my own political perspective was, I'm running for re-election in a year. I have a 50% district over here that I'm not even going to get to serve for the next year because I'm not going to have that district. And so it was an unpleasant experience in that first 6 months.
I'm sure.
To take on a colleague and to do that and to ask people to choose. But the city attorney was very adamant that it is one person, one vote. And this happens all the time. And it wasn't my fault that this redistricting was occurring and the numbers had changed. And so both of those challenges I had to deal with in my first few months of being elected there. So, and then
Tom ease into the job.
Yeah, he's into the job, because those are that's the most political part of being an elected official is redistricting.
Right.
There's nothing more political other than voting whoever's going to be president of the city council. So,
and I know there were there was a whole host of, Jan Perry's district was, so it sounded like it was very.
Yes, and hers came up the 10 years later, again, another battle, but yes, that was in that time. It was not a pleasant time because there was a lot of infighting and who was going to control, because people want to have that iconic piece in your district. Now, mine never had iconic. It was just mostly residential, and so which means you have a lot of constituents that you have to deal with and issues that are of concern to them. But I represented this beautiful area just north of where we are, and the mountains, and trying to preserve those mountains and to preserve the equestrian lifestyle, in addition to kind of protecting our neighborhoods in the rest of the city council district. So, my first 3 months was dealing with this redistricting and when it was going to take place and what my district was going to look like, and to demonstrate that I could do the job well because I was going to be running. Because the secession vote was in November. So I get elected in March, I get my new district in July, redistricting happens in November, the secession vote is in November, and if it had passed, I would have been the shortest term council member in the history of the city of Los Angeles.
The entire valley would have
been a new, yes. And so that was a big challenge. And in between there, I got married in July.
Getting pregnant.
And then I got pregnant in October. Then I, had to run for re-election in March, right after that. And then had my son on July 4th the following year. So it was a very busy year and a half to get all of that in.
What was it like giving birth to your child while in your basically first year-ish on the city council?
Well, it was challenging on many levels because, of course, everyone was asking. I was 41.
Right.
Are you going to have children? Are you? There's a funny story about my husband who, a friend of ours, mutual friend that we didn't know knew each other, tried to set him up with me 9 months before we met, and had described me as 40 and not Jewish, did not give my name, described my best friend, who was 32 and not Jewish. He was interested in dating her. He was not interested in dating me because he wanted kids. And so when he met me, and he happened to call this friend and say, hey, I met this woman, you might know her. She said, yes, that would be the 40-year-old not Jewish woman you didn't want to marry or didn't want to meet or go out with. And so I give him a hard time about that all the time. But he decided I was worth it, whether I could have kids or not. And so anyways, when we got pregnant and being older, we waited a while to tell people just to make sure that everything was okay, and just didn't want it to be a public until it happened. And so we waited that 12 weeks. And we also had a lot of people who said, oh, are you going to quit your job now that you are going to have a baby? Or how are you going to be a good mom in being elected official? And that was more frequent than I'd like to admit that occurs in today's world. And so it was challenging. And the other kind of wrinkle in that was my colleagues had come to me and said, we want you to run for president of the city council. In my first year, I'm pregnant. And I was like, ugh. And then we've got the votes, and here it is. And, anyways, long story short, a couple of people who said they were there weren't there. I figured this out about 10 days maybe before the vote was going to happen, and about 10 days before my son was due. And in fact, there were people who questioned whether or not I could be president of city council and a new mom. And again, my whole life experience had been, you can do anything you want to do, and you just figure it out. And so when I knew that I was not going to have the votes, I, called the president of the council and said, look, I'm not running, and, you're going to win this election, whatever, however that goes. But my staff had actually gone to the point of seeing if, in fact, it was close, like I was one vote and it was my vote, and if I was giving birth that day, and if I had to do it from a hospital room, could I vote from there? And in fact, you can. The only glitch was I had to have my room open to the public so that if anyone who wanted to come into my room when I was voting, when I was there, when I was on, they could be there. So it didn't happen, thank goodness. But yes, so it was one of those things where deciding when I would come back to work, I had to take into consideration that if I didn't come to work soon enough, I would be considered a bad elected official and not doing my job. If I came back too soon, I would be considered a bad mom. I wasn't doing enough for my kid. And so we struggled with that. And what ultimately we were able to do is I went back 2 weeks after he was born, just on days of city council, with the nanny and all that. And then I worked from home the other days. And then we had a 3-week break for the summer that they normally have. And I think it was 2 weeks. And then I came back full time. And my son came back to work with me for 6 months with the nanny every day. So he was a frequent, person strolling through. He got to meet a lot of people now when they see him say, I remember you, when you were coming through with the stroller, and the nanny would take you around the 3rd floor of City Hall and walk you around. And so that was quite an experience, that 6 months of really trying to juggle that all. And then somewhat, probably even a little bit harder when you have him at home and then trying to get back in time to be able to see him, and what times and how do you do that. But we were very lucky. It all worked out. He's an okay kid.
It's work, there's no doubt, especially if you're working. How did your colleagues respond to you?
They were I have to say, extremely supportive, because there were times that I had to go upstairs to breastfeed. And I would be listening in on the council, and I had told them I've left, but I'm listening. And if I need to come down and vote for something, can you hold the vote? And I will come down. There were rare times that that they had to necessarily do it. I remember a time where we were in executive session, and I could not leave because that is not a public thing, so I couldn't listen in anywhere. I had to be there. And my son was hungry. So, the nanny brought him down, and I sat in the back of the chambers and listened to the whole conversation, and everything was pretty calm until he suddenly like screamed out at one point, after, and no one knew he was there because I was so stealth about it. I was just sitting in the corner. And Antonio Villaragosa always tells a story about that's when he bonded with my son, because I went to speak in executive session, and I had him on my shoulder burping him, and Antonio's like, no, I need to do it. And he takes Thomas and goes and holds him while I'm speaking and having interaction and doing what we need to do. And but they were all very, very, very supportive through that, I have to say.
So what were some of the critical issues you worked on while you were on the LA City Council?
So there were many. I mean, one specifically that I'm pretty proud of, which was the business tax reform in the city of LA, because that to me was a way in which to increase our economy, to deal with, I think, some inequities that had occurred, and to lead that effort on trying to do that. And what it did is it reduced business tax for some. They didn't need to pay business tax anymore. For others, there was a reduction, and there was millions of dollars that we were able to save for those businesses, and jobs that were created because of that. I think one of the other things I was very proud of for my district was saving more than 1,200 acres of open space for this region that didn't exist before, and being able to negotiate that in perpetuity will be for the public to be able to see. I think the other parts, I chaired the transportation committee for many years, and really having a transportation plan put in place to be able to have, they call them, I can't even think of the name all of a sudden, but they're anti-gridlock zones where, unfortunately, if you're there, you get a bigger ticket because it's during the time of rush hour. But the idea was we need to be able to move the traffic during those times. And I think that, for me, being chair of that committee was a really important part of it as well. And then looking at some of the economic development programs that I was able to do to be able to increase and encourage on the LA's Best program to make that grow as well. And it was really an extraordinary time in getting to work with Laura Chick when she was controller, and to be able to be chair of the audits committee and push forward some real change in some of these departments, one of which was the rape kits, which you'll hear from Laura Chick. She did the first audit, which was to say, we're not counting these. They're sitting literally in the shelves in these freezers and not been tested, and rapists are getting away, and others are victims because of this. And so helped in the change and implementation of some of the recommendations that she had. And then when I became controller, was the ability to then see it even further and to push them again to say you haven't done enough. And I think, ironically, I wasn't ever necessarily planning on running for city controller either. But when I was no longer running for president of the city council, and I called Alex Padilla, who again is a friend of mine, politics, one day you might be fighting on something, the next day you work on projects together. I knew that because I was going to run against him potentially, that when I didn't, that I was not going to get the best committees. I was not going to be, at that time, chair of budget committee or anything. And so I asked for the chair of audits and government efficiency, because I thought I could talk about any issue I wanted to in there, and it didn't matter. And that was a committee no one wanted. And I got it, and then immediately everyone's like, oh, you should run for city controller, and you should do this. And, it, again, wasn't something that I had necessarily planned on, but seeing how effective Laura had been and what she was able to do was impressive. And so it gave me that kind of opportunity to do that.
Speaking of Laura and women on the council, what kind of relationship did you have with the other women on the council during your time there?
I would say most of the time it was great, that we kind of stuck together. We really tried.
How many were there?
When I came on, there were 5 of us. So it was Ruth, me, Janice, Cindy Misakowski, and Jan Perry. Those were the 5. That was the height. That was when we had 5 council members, councilwomen. And so we didn't have a block like like all the women vote together, but we were support systems for one another. And over the years, they didn't always necessarily continue, but the idea was, particularly on the issues that the women cared about, we would support one another as much as possible.
what do you think unique contributions women make to the city council that makes them different from men on the city council?
Well, I think in a couple ways. One, their leadership style, and two, their perspective. And there are some great feminist men. They're fabulous, but it doesn't come from the same place and the issues that care about them. And I think we're seeing that even on the national level today. You know, it is something that you remember, that when you're a mom and you're trying to have quality child care, affordable child care for your kid, and that's your responsibility and you're doing, that's something you're going to talk about much more than the guy next to you. It's just different. Also, if, you know, I think it's also similar in ethnicities, you know, what your experience have been, you know, African-American males who've been stopped by LAPD or some other police officers over the years understand what it means different than I would. And so that's okay to be different and have those perspectives. I think the leadership style in consensus building and trying to figure out the solutions, women do that. Now, we often get criticized, and I know in my elections that, you know, being a consensus builder was a negative. And I remember when I was running for city controller, I had a editorial writer ask me in an interview, could I be mean? And I said, that's the wrong question that you're asking me. What you really are asking me is, can I be tough? And they are not the same. And you can be tough without being mean. And you can be mean without being tough. And so I said, I think that's wrong. And so I believe that the public, the way they look at us is just different. And again, you look at the national side today and the kinds of things they look at women. And, you know, instead of their public policy points, it's what they're wearing. What does their hair look like? You know, I have so many stories about that, about how they treat women differently when you're running for office. But I think it is different.
Tell me a couple of those. I was going to ask you later, but it seems
okay.
It'll seem redundant. If I come back to it later, it seems natural to ask now.
Well, I mean, I had so many stories about what I was wearing, and bloggers who would say I was wearing an inappropriate off the shoulder dress and my two-toned hair, or I remember another instance which was unfortunate because it was a woman reporter who I'd served on a panel with on how tough it was to be a woman in different professions. And she came from the perspective of being a woman reporter. And it was during the time that the city attorney at the time was being criticized for having his wife drive the car, and maybe his staff babysitting the kids and all these kinds of things. So this reporter comes up to me and asks me at an event, did my husband ever drive my car, my city car? I said, no, my husband's never driven a city car. And then she tried to cite wasn't there at a parade, and didn't he? I was like, no, she's trying to trick me in something. I said, no, my husband has never driven the city car. Well, have you ever had your staff babysit your kids, your child? No, I've never had my staff babysit. I haven't, proudly said I have a nanny, and in fact, my nanny came to work every single day with me, for this period of time. She leaves. She comes back. Now, I don't know if this is her editors telling her to say this or what, but she comes back 10 minutes later. So why didn't you put your kid in a daycare facility at the City Hall daycare facility instead of interrupting your staff's time during the day and making it disruptive for them by having your kid with you? And I looked at her and I thought, you're really not asking me that question, are you? And I said, I'd rather not answer that on camera. And she said, well, why? And I said, I had him with me every day because I was breastfeeding. And I really don't think that that's anyone's business on camera for a news story that you have. And I said, and also, I'm not always in City Hall, and I'm traveling and going places, and they have to be picked up at 6 o'clock. That's the problem with and why I'm such an advocate on childcare. And I never forgave her for that question. I have to say, I got in my car and I cried. I called my chief of staff and I said, am I a bad parent that I didn't put him in this, or am I a bad elected official? Have I done something wrong, And I share that on camera in this way because I think it's important for people to know what people say to you and what people do to you, and why women in those positions, having them in high positions, whether it's elected office or others, or in the boardroom, it's the perspective that you have is added benefit. And I remember another example of a parent who approached my husband in preschool when my son had this moment, which parents can all relate to, which is you're starting to leave them at preschool and they have this reversion of, don't leave me, you're the worst parent ever, and they cry, and then 30 seconds after you're gone, they're fine. And so the teacher was like, he's fine, don't worry, it's gonna be a week of this, but he'll be okay. Parent comes up to my husband and says, is your son always like this? And my husband's kind of gets a little defensive, trying to explain, no, the teacher said this happens, blah, blah, blah. And she says, oh, has Wendy not been home enough lately? And my husband didn't respond. He told me the story later, and I said, you didn't yell back at her, how dare you say this? And he said, I was just so amazed that she would say this at all. And I immediately told him I knew who it was. And he goes, how do you know? And I said, because I know when people are judging my parenting skills, who I am, that I'm the parent that's running in to drop off my child and go where I need to go, or coming to the soccer game with my high heels on and leaving as soon as it's finished because I'm working. And I was right, it was that woman. And so I think that the more that you can have women in places of power, it's really important. And I think it's also important that women have choices. I have a lot of respect for women who say, I'm not going to work and do that. And now that I have more flexibility in my life, I get it. And the ability to some days pick my kid up from school is a fabulous thing to be able to do. And I didn't always get to do that, and I'm enjoying that piece of my life. But I think women should make their own choices. No one should dictate or judge them in the decisions that they make for their lives. And so I have always been an advocate and speak out as much as I possibly can about what I experienced so that they understand why they need to stand up for themselves as well.
That's great. In what ways or what kinds of women's issues did you deal with while you were on the council, or address while you were on that? I know you said childcare is one that you've been a long-time advocate for.
And well, I think that even the job creation and the business tax reform, so many of the small businesses are run by women entrepreneurs, and so many people were being taken advantage in that instance. And so I think oftentimes there's just the women's perspective on that issue. So rec and parks, when we want to have more programs in rec and parks, I was thinking about what was going to be able to be used for those kids and to be able to utilize those facilities, and that they didn't have a park in their neighborhood, and particularly in some of these low-income areas. I remember a story of a park in my Van Nuys piece of my district, which was literally the soccer fields were dirt. The bathrooms had graffiti on them and no doors on them. And when I went to the department right after I got elected, and I said, you are going to put doors, and you're going to, it costs too much money. I said, let me think. Do you think this happened in Palisades, that you would answer that question? Do you think if this was in Studio City, that you would say you wouldn't put doors on it? Just because this is Van Nuys does not mean you cannot take care of them. And I want you to do it. And they did, immediately. So, I did it in my own way, and I think when you talk about how women do things differently, I remember on the city council, I was not a pound on the table kind of gal, because I believed when you did that too often, they stopped listening to you. And I know when I started talking about an issue that mattered to me, and my voice was the Wendy strong voice, that they would listen to me. And I wasn't just talking for the cameras. And I think that's important, in that women know how to do that too.
Yeah. What do you see as your greatest accomplishment during your time on the city council?
Oh my gosh. I would say, I go between a few things. One, business tax reform was so important to me because that was long lasting and it really was something that had been tried and failed for a decade. But I think the other that I will always fondly think about was the saving of the more than 1,200 acres of parkland, which was not an easy feat. That generations to come are going to be able to go to that parkland and to be able to see
Where is
that
the parkland
beautiful.
again, just for the...
So it's off the 210 freeway. It's on both sides of the freeway, but primarily off of La Tuna Canyon and up in those mountains. And that side of the freeway will never be developed. So you'll be able to see, and I combined, I bought a piece of property in the middle of two others and combined and made a 500-acre park up there as well, which, again, I got private dollars and city dollars. I was one of those that I'd probably be considered the tortoise, on getting something done. The first, and I think only, sustainable senior citizen center in Los Angeles is in the San Fernando Valley at the Van Nuys Sherman Oaks Park. I worked years on getting that, even in a recession, and getting the money and getting it located. We were the only district that did not have its own senior center. And today you can walk into that, and it's a beautiful part of that park, and the seniors enjoying it. And I think, being able to be an advocate for people who didn't have a voice.
That's wonderful. So you mentioned redistricting as a challenge. Were there any other kind of major challenges during your years on the council?
I'm trying to think of any that I didn't win my battle and what I wanted to.
Or even that was difficult, even if you won.
Yeah. I mean, I think the whole, on the leadership side and that first year, my first 2 years were probably, again, the most challenging in so much happening in my life, and being encouraged to be leadership and all of that. That just was the tough thing. And then I think it was, getting ready to run, for office, which is not an easy feat. In that way, and running for city controller and being able to get all the pieces together. And people want to have a strong city controller, but it's not an area where you easily can raise money or to do that part of it. There's no benefit seen in it, others they want to have good government there. And I think the other challenge that happened during that time, I lost my mom. She died suddenly, and I tell this other story because when I think about my early life and why I got to where I was and who my mentors were and inspired me. As I mentioned, my mom grew up in a small town, and in the 80s, I think it was in the 80s, she bought 2 homes in Harrisburg, Illinois. The biggest homes in the area. They were mirror images of each other, and decided to turn them into a bed and breakfast. And I thought, Mom, we have a business in North Hollywood, we have one in Oxnard, you want to open up a bed and breakfast in a town now of only 9,000 people. Who's going to come there, And so she jokingly said, well, the prison is only 30 miles away, and people have to go visit them in the federal prison because they're usually there for a long time, so they come often and they could stay in a nice place. I said I would not use that as a marketing tool. But the Peabody Coal Company, would come in and they needed a place to stay. There was no real hotel, and people would do parties there, receptions, wedding receptions, because they were lovely homes. But I could never quite understand why she did it. And she served as the person who registered, they'd call and they'd get her here in Los Angeles, and she would do all the reservations and had someone manage it. And she had a premonition that she was going to pass away. She did not tell us that, but she had a premonition. And so she told her staff member the night she died, actually, that she thought she was going to die that night. But a month before, she started telling us all these stories I had never heard before in all the years. And she was a pretty good storyteller. And so she says to my husband and I, do you know why I bought those houses? I said, no, I never really understood why you did that. You're a good businesswoman, and it makes no business sense to me. And I ran it for 9 months after she died, and it really was not a good business decision. But she said, well, when I was young, maybe 12 years old, and my sister and I went trick-or-treating in Harrisburg, Illinois, we were from the wrong side of the tracks. My dad was a coal miner, and so we went uptown to these beautiful homes and went trick-or-treating. And she said, and I went to this house, because the person owned the 2 homes, and knocked on their door, and they slammed the door in our faces and said, we don't give to your kind. And she said, I vowed at that age that I would own those homes one day, and I would prove to them that I had become somebody. And she goes, that's why I bought them. So I always get emotional when I think about it, but she thought about what she could do, and without graduating from college, coming out here by herself, she inspired me to be who I am.
That must have been really tough to lose her in the middle of all that.
Yeah, she was not so sure. You know, the politics thing, you know, my dad, when I went to DreamWorks, said, I am so happy that you are out of politics and you work in DreamWorks. And I was like, well, Dad, I'm not quite out of politics because I'm doing political stuff for them. But that was his, you know, happiness of being able to do that. But yes, it was, you know, we had unfortunately in our family, we've had a lot of happiness and a lot of loss of family on my husband's side, but it's what makes you stronger. And I think why when we always think about how our son has grown up to be a great kid in the midst of all of that, of having both parents who work, you know, having a support system, having all his grandparents pass away during this time, and his uncle, and me winning campaigns and losing campaigns, he's a pretty strong kid through all of that. And that's when people try to challenge me on how can you be a good mom and an elected official, I remind them of not only my kid, but there are other kids that fit in that same category, that it is about that quality of time you spend with your child and what you teach them and the values that you teach them. And that's what my parents did too, because they worked all the time. But I still knew they loved me, and I still knew that they were going to support me in every step of the way, and they instilled in us those really great values.
What do you think it takes to be an effective city council member?
Well, I think several things. I mean, one, going in knowing that being a city council member is one of the toughest jobs you have, that you have. I think probably being governor or president are tough jobs, but being a city council member, you are so close to the people every single day. And I used to talk to my colleagues on the city council who had been state legislators, and they would say, although they loved being a city council member, it was so much tougher because it's where the rubber hits the road. So you're going to be sought out at when you're in a restaurant, when you're in the grocery store, wherever you are, and they're going to say to you, my street hasn't been paved and I called your office and they didn't respond. Or, there's a dangerous intersection at so-and-so, or it took me so that those kinds of things that you have to be prepared, that details matter. And that's important for somebody to go into city council. I think, too, it is about building a coalition. You need 8 votes on everything. Sometimes you need 10 votes, depending upon the issue before the city council. You need to figure out who your allies are. I think the other piece is which issues are you going to spend your time on? I wanted to do everything. Everything. I was like, I want to do this, and I want to do this, and my staff would look at me and go, you cannot. Pick the issues that you want. You're going to chair these certain, committees, and those are the ones that you're going to focus on. And you can do a little bit of these things, but when you leave, people are going to say to you, what was she known for? And you'd be like, you got to, what is it that people will remember you for? And so how do you select those and have a goal in mind? Which we'd actually, set a pyramid kind of how we were going to get to those different points, the foundation of what our ultimate goal would be and how we were going to get that and who we needed to be part of it. So really having a strong strategy. I think the last thing about being an elected official and a council member is finding the right people who work for you. You're only as good as the people you have. I had an extraordinary chief of staff who just got it, who by the first year could finish my sentences, and I trusted her to make judgment calls on a number of things and hiring of staff and who that was. And sorry, one last thing, which is be true to who you are. Yeah. Because you're going to have to piss off people every single day. And sometimes if you make both sides angry, you have done your job. And I did that so many times of trying to find that place which was going to help. You know, your everyday challenges are development. You know, they're going to build that building or not, or how are you going to stop that particular development. You know, what kind of services are you able to deliver, and to be able to say to people, you know what, this is what I can do, this is what I can't do. This is what I think can pass the city council, and this is what can't. And you know, if you want me to lie to you, then I will, you know, I can tell you what you want, and then it's not going to happen. But I'm going to be truthful to you. And I learned that walking precincts and talking to people, because I'd walk up to some of these doors, and we would be opposite directions on gun control, or, you know, again, things that were kind of a minuscule part of my job as a council member. But I would tell them, this is why my position is what it is, and why I'm doing it, and ultimately they would vote for me. And I think that serves you well going forward, because you can only get away with it a few times where people realize you're not telling the truth. And a lot of politicians do that. They're risk adverse. So if you are just who you are, people will still support you.
What motivates you as a political leader?
I think it may sound Pollyanna, but, you know, is to make a difference, and I always thought I had something to add, that I was the problem solver, you know. And I learned that when I worked for Tom Bradley. He would always say, this is an unsolvable social problem or an issue we need to resolve quickly, could you give it to Wendy, you know? Or when I worked for Andy, this seems really hard, do you think you can go do this? And that was who I was. I was the problem solver. The challenge with that is, when you're running for office, sometimes that's not a very good message. It doesn't, you know, it doesn't resonate as much. You know, it's the big visionary, you know, things, and I can do that, but I'm more the practical. I'm more the person who says, this is what I said I was going to do, and this is what I did. I promised you how to do these things, and so I think that for me is a piece of what I try to enable others to see what I did well and what I didn't. I can also be self-critical and say, I should have done more of X, Y, and Z.
Right. You talked a little bit about this already, but how would you describe your leadership style?
Again, I think it is one of consensus building and getting everyone's ideas, and then coming up with a plan, and then selling that plan and getting others to be on board with you. When I did business tax reform, I specifically went to a couple council members who I knew might not be necessarily supportive, but they bought in because I brought them in. I brought the labor unions in on business tax reform because I believed that they could have potentially been an opponent. So I think that the leadership style is making sure everyone feels as though they've been heard. And then they can still, again, vote against you or be mad at you, but they can never say you didn't do the steps that were necessary to get something approved and to get to that place. I found it even in being the city controller, because, you know, you will release an audit, no one likes you. Laura Chick will tell you that. You know, she told me the first day, it's one of the loneliest jobs you will ever have, because you just anger people, because you're pointing out things that are wrong. I would tell the mayor, I would tell the city council members, and I would tell the department heads, embrace what I've written, thank me for my leadership on this, say you'll work with me to implement, and move on. I said, that's a one-day story. I said, if you say your audit findings aren't right, and Laura was great at this. I mean, she was incredible, because she would fight back too, which was, if you come after me and say what I've done is incorrect or false, then I'm going to defend my auditors who wrote this, my position where I've taken on this, and it's going to be a several-day story, because that's what people like. So either you're going to produce something or you're not. And I, you know, again, in that whole, I did a report card on, here's what I've done, here's how each of the departments have done in those audits. And I thought that's a way of accountability. And that was very much that transparency and accountability was part of my whole thing through when I first got elected.
So, I mean, it sounds now like a natural, but what made you decide that you were going to run for controller?
You know, I think I saw that it was, you know, timing part of it, and an opportunity, and that Laura Chick had done such a great job, and to kind of In some ways, it's challenging because she did such a good job. You know, the next person always has a very high bar to be able to do that. But I thought to be able to take the leadership that she had and move to that next level was really important. And I did think if I ever wanted to run for mayor, that being a citywide elected official was a great opportunity. And I thought it was a natural continuation of what I had been doing on the city council, that it would be a level where I could, again, take those problems and specifically work with those departments to make it happen.
So what kinds of conversations did you have with Laura before you decided to run?
I asked her about where, you know, where she thought the challenges were, you know, did she like the job? You know, I think she probably, you know, she did. There was an instance where they wanted to extend the term limits for council and then potentially for mayor and the other two citywide elected officials. And it ultimately didn't happen. I was fine either way, because if I wanted to run for controller, I could have waited 4 more years to do that if Laura stayed in that position. But it was a kind of controversial time in that area. But I think she saw that it was. She told me it's a great job too as a parent, because you don't have to be at city council every day at this time and go to all those events at nights. You know, you can have a balanced life. I jokingly said to her, you know, there's never going to be anything balanced in my life. That's just who I am. But it does give you that flexibility otherwise. And so she was encouraging about the job itself.
So what was it like to run for a citywide office versus having run for city council?
It was harder because for me, you know, you have a city council district, you know, here's how many, you know, houses. If I go to this many houses and I get this many people say yes to me, I win the election. If I do these many mailers, not so scientific on the citywide office part. Mm-hmm. It's all about TV and direct mail, and it's not about walking precincts. It's about sending a message that you're going to be tough, you know, all those kinds of things that you think are important to the voter, and it's about raising enough money to do that. So it was a very different experience. It's not as rewarding in some ways, but it's not as stressful in other ways.
So what do you see as some of your greatest accomplishments while you were in the controller's office?
So I think one, which I talked about earlier, was the continued audits on the rape kits, because it kept it in the forefront, and to really push the police department to not only test the ones that they had in storage, but to continue to have enough staff to implement and ensure that once a rape kit came in, that it was tested as quickly as possible, that it wasn't months, and that when the actual results came in, that there was immediate action on that. I think one of the others was my transportation audit, which I did, which was really a whole review of the entire department. Again, didn't necessarily make friends for me. One of the others that was more, which was also controversial, which is an audit we did of the Department of Water and Power when they were withholding money from the city of Los Angeles. And I said that they had the money to give us, and that they were, in essence, playing games with that. And had choice words with a lot of people during that time because they weren't happy with that. You know, in instances where I would release an audit, and then some of my city council colleagues and others would try to feed information to the press person to ask me something that they felt was going to be damning to me. Again, honesty, best policy to be able to do that. So I think, you know, we released, I'm going to have my numbers maybe wrong, but, you know, 80 or 90 audits within a period of, in the 4 years, which I was very impressed with, and identified a lot of potential savings that we would have had.
Wow. So before you and Laura got involved with the rape kit, how long were the rape kits sitting there for?
Years. Yeah.
Do you think it made a difference that there was 2 women controllers who finally got this thing moving along?
Absolutely. I don't think, and again, not that there aren't guys that would care about the issue, and in fact, you know, Chief Beck was the deputy, I think it was the deputy chief at the time that this issue came up, and he was on it and was just following, and when he became chief, you know, it was priority for him as well. But I do think that how women look at issues, it matters, and whether or not it's the top of the list. I mean, just even recently in the, it was covered in the press, in the debate between Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders, where there was not one question about women's reproductive rights, which for most women in this country are very scared about some of the potential challenges. It's not being asked. And she said, why aren't you asking this? A guy's not going to necessarily say that in that kind of debate.
You said you had to have a lot of tough conversations when you released the transportation audit. What were people most upset about when you released your transportation audit?
Well, we did several in a row, which was one on tickets and how tickets were being handled, that were suddenly, you got a ticket and then it disappeared, no longer. And so we, had certain people who had tried to help somebody get it released or whatever, and having to, call their office and say FYI. And in fact, unbeknownst to me, this is, again, transparency, one of my staff members had tried to help his mom, who happened to be visiting and had gotten a ticket and had asked about it. And people came to me and, isn't that outrageous? And I said, absolutely, he shouldn't have done it. And I didn't defend it, but they all started to come after me then. It was quite interesting, but you have to have thick skin.
Yeah, I get that from observing people.
Many, yes.
All the time.
All these.
And listening to all the stories that you all have told me. What were some of the challenges of being controller?
I think one, I had this impression that I was going to go in and get people to implement my recommendations, that they would just take them, and of course they would be, and I wasn't going to be antagonistic, and this is important, but they didn't want to do that. If it didn't benefit them or it was something that was critical of them, they didn't want to give us a win. And any of the, controllers, and talking to Laura Chick, that was unfortunate, because you really wanted to be able to say, hey, I did this audit and I said these 5 things and they've all been implemented and now we've saved X amount of dollars. And although there were some departments that were fabulous about that, there were others that were not so supportive.
So what were the best things that did happen out of your audits in terms of reducing waste in the city?
Well, I think, we now have, again, the transportation, a number of their policies were changed that impacted, so that never would occur again, and those kind of the rape kits and that particular one. Fuel usage was another one I did. I did another audit on how much money we were losing from our advertising around bus stops and so forth, and how much money that we lost that we could regain if we changed our public policies in these areas. So I continue to get calls from reporters and others saying, this happened, what do you think? Because the audits they live on past their time of when you release them.
So why did you decide to run for mayor in 2013?
When I was asked decades ago, or even when I was first, even as a city council member, what's the best elected job that you would ever, and I always said mayor, because I worked for mayor, and I worked for a mayor who used the power of that position for good, took tough stands, knew the communities, loved his job, and realized that this is a city that I grew up in, and my father grew up in, and a business I have in this area that I want to see it do better, and I want my son, as I always say, to live as close as he possibly can to his mom in the future, and I want to be able to have a city that he actually wants to live in. And so I thought that with all of my experience in the private sector and the public sector on the federal level, in the entertainment industry, and being city council member controller, that I had the experience that it took to run a city, which is important. There are a lot of people who can be legislative. Very few people who can go into an executive position and manage in that way.
So what were the challenges that you faced during that election?
Oh my gosh, there were so many.
Yes.
One daunting was, of course, raising the money and how you'd be able to do that. Again, I was city controller. I wasn't a council member who had a natural constituency that you could take from. Again, I'm not saying there was quid pro quo, but you just happen to see those people more often because that's your district, and you can do that. I think that the other biggest challenge was how to get across who I am in a way in my own campaign, and how to make sure the press understood who I was. Because I say to people, look, I lost my race for some of the things that I did and I would do differently today, and things that were not within my control. And who knows which one it is. And it's luck, and it's chance, and it's all of those things, and it's politics in that. So for me, the hardest part was the fact that I couldn't do the things I wanted to do, which was just talk to voters. You have to do the debates. You have to appear before all of the Democratic clubs and all of the labor endorsements and business groups, and go and speak to that, and then have these debates, which are not real. I think telling. I think you see this on national level, telling about the difference between two candidates, maybe once in a while, and particularly when we had candidates who are very similar on issues. You have to be able to differentiate yourself. And for me, I think the biggest challenge was my whole career had been, I'm independent on my beliefs, and I'm going to stick to my values. As I mentioned earlier, today I'm going to anger you, and the next day I might anger somebody else. So in this campaign, I had both business and labor support. But because of politics as they were, I was seen as the labor candidate and not the business candidate. And it was at a time in which people were down on labor and pensions and all of that. And I do think some of the female part of this that happened was people believe that women candidates or women electeds could be more easily influenced and pushed around. They don't ask the same questions that they would of a guy. I had a lot of support from different people. Was because some group gave me more money, I was going to be more influenced by them? No. In fact, I probably would be tougher on them because people would be thinking I was going to be closer to them. And so I think some of that, as you look at history and women elected, and if you went through and saw what kinds of questions and issues and how people portrayed, you would see that they would say women are more easily influenced, and that's how they do it. When I first ran for city council, a friend of mine said, your friends will disappoint you and complete strangers will amaze you. And that has been so true throughout my entire career. And I know for people who came to me and said, look, I am friends with X candidate, whether it was Eric or Jan or whomever, and I've been friends with them forever. I like you, and if they're not in the race, I'll support you, but right now I've got to support them. And I'd be like, that's okay, I get it. Or someone said, I don't know what to choose. I'd say, just support both of us. But the most frustrating thing is when someone says, I'm going to stay out. And then you find out that they actually were helping the other person. Again, I have a lot of people who are on the other side who are still my friends and vice versa. But it has to be in a way that you communicate that. And politics is a messy business.
Yes, it is. So how did you, you made it to a runoff with Eric Garcetti. How did you stand out above the other, because there was other qualified candidates too that
Yes.
didn't even make.
I think a couple things in one, because I'd been a citywide elected, that I had these varied experience, and the controller experience was a good one to add to that. And I was able to raise the money. Being able to get mailers out and have your TV ads and do all that was really important to be able to have that message. And for me, I started early, I never hesitated. I didn't wait the day I was able to file, I filed. I knew this is what I wanted to do. I wasn't going to go, well, I'm thinking about it, I don't know. I wanted to be mayor. I'm going to run for office, and I'm going to do this.
Right. What did you learn from the 2014 election?
Wow, a lot. I learned a few things. So I learned that there were probably some instances where I knew we should go in one direction, but I trusted my advisors that they knew what they were talking about. And this is not blaming them at all, because this is me having it in my gut. I knew, and I didn't say anything else. And because the hardest thing is you are pulled in so many different directions that you never have enough time to do what you want to do. There's the constant battle of raising money. I mean, it is every day, every moment, every waking second that you have to try to figure out how you're going to get money from somebody to be able to do what you want to do. I think the other thing I learned was to tell more the story of who you are. And people said to me, I didn't see that in your ads or whatever. They'd say, I know you and I know who you are, and that just didn't come off in the way the campaign, what they did. So that, I think, is something else that I learned through that. And there were some things where I was tough on that maybe I would have gone a different direction in criticizing, but maybe not criticizing in the way that we did, going backwards. I will never be in a position where I say, don't do comparison or negative, whatever you want to call it, campaigning. That's part of what exists, and you have to, explain the differences. Would I have done a few things differently? Yeah. But I look back in the hardest day, well, there were many hard days, and polling, just was one of those. You just like, oh my God, another poll's going to come out, and is it, when it showed us even, I'd be ecstatic, and then one, I remember, was coming out right after President Clinton had endorsed me, and showed us 10 points behind. And even though we thought we could make it up, it was hard, because then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy for the funding side of it. So when you call people on Monday, when a poll shows you're 10 points behind on Sunday, well, how do you know you're going to win, and what do you mean? And so you have to, it takes so much longer to get people. There's those that are just loyal no matter what, and they're going to help you get to that direction. And we saw that we were making good progress as we got closer, and that's when the last week of the campaign, Eric went 100% negative. 100% negative, because they knew they had to cut into my day, because I won the mail-in ballots. I got 52%. If I'd gotten 55% of the mail-in, then I would have won the election. But I lost on the election day because of that negative advertising. Again, it's so interesting, because so many people who were angry with me on some of my negative advertising never criticized the guys for the negative advertising. Even same when I ran for city council, even same when I ran for city controller. There's something about when a woman is critical that people don't like and think. And particularly if it's a woman against another woman. Yeah. And there's a whole social psychology around all of that, and how you run a campaign. And one of the challenges, there's very few women who run campaigns. Very few. Women are fundraisers, but very few are running the campaigns themselves, and to do that. And my son, on the hardest day was the morning after, when I had to tell my son that we'd lost. He was 9, and he had been in it, he was definitely part of all of this. And we'd prepared him for win or lose, and if we were honest with ourselves, we probably thought it was going to be tough for me to win, that we knew a few days ahead of time or a week ahead of time. So we prepared him for it, but nothing prepares you for telling them. So I told him in the morning, and he cried, and there really wasn't anything you could say to console. I mean, it just was a hard thing for him to get his head around. As my husband said later, though, nothing that chocolate chip pancakes an hour later didn't solve. So he was fixing him pancakes. I had to go do the 10 camera, I lost, all interview me, morning thing, which was not fun. And I told them, you do not have to come with me. So he didn't go to school that day. And we had told him, win or lose, he wasn't going to go to school because he'd stayed up so late. So Saturday, his 4th grade teacher emails me. She had never communicated with me the entire year outside of, going into parent-teacher stuff. And she says, a story about your son. And I thought, oh my God, he went into class and someone said something and he cried or whatever. I'm just having, just seeing the subject matter. And she proceeds through this email to say that they were reading a book on the gold rush in class. And one of the characters says, boys are more courageous than girls. And so she decides to ask the class, what do you think? Is that true? So one kid raised his hand, no, Amelia Earhart was courageous, and Rosa Parks was courageous, and Dolores Huerta. And she says, your son raised his hand and said, my mom. My mom was courageous to try to be the first woman mayor, and I'm proud of her. And I thought, wow, what a great story to tell, and that's what he got out of it was really important to me. Because when you make a decision, and I think particularly as a woman, men do this too, but women more so, as a parent, when you're going to run for office, when you're going to put your family out there, the kinds of things that were said about me and my family, my husband, all of that, you've got to be prepared, and you think about how's it going to impact my kid and what will he take out of it. And, knock on wood, he's learned what it means to win and to lose and to hold yourself to high standards as much as possible.
I was going to ask you this question at some point anyway. What role did your family play in your campaigns over the years?
So, my husband was always by my side. So he is a manager and producer and with writers and directors of film and television and a lawyer. Made a choice many years ago to have his own company, and so which gave us some flexibility as well with family, and really allowed us to do that. But he has helped everything from fundraising to phone banking to speech prep, and he was a litigator, so he was always one that would push and also have some conversations with people that needed to happen. He would have. Whether it was campaign consultants or others about what was happening or encouraging, or if people were worried about how's Wendy doing, he would be the guy. So just incredibly part of that. And Thomas too, he would come and they made phone calls to get people out to vote on election day. He would go out at 4:30 in the morning and do door hangers. He wanted to be part of it, which was really nice.
So you talked about how your son responded. How did you recover from what I imagine would have been a disappointing loss?
It was harder in disappointing people, I guess I would say. I was like, I've done great things. I worked really hard. I feel proud of what we did. I can't believe I'm the first woman ever to be in a runoff in the mayor's race in the city of Los Angeles. But the hardest thing was talking to people who had done so much for me, and that they felt a loss too, and I didn't know how to make them feel better about that loss. And there were some people that were angry. I had this conversation with my son because why don't we get together with so and so's family? And I was like, not sure we're going to do that. They haven't gotten over it. And he goes, what do you mean they haven't gotten over it? And I said, they haven't gotten over it, and they're angry about either which consultant I hired or which, action I took, or I shouldn't have done that, or I should have done this, and they told me so. And so there's kind of that category, but more so the category of people who really went out for me and just put their heart and soul and risk, for their business or whatever it was in city business. And I will never forget that. So that was the hardest. And I think the other hard part was the questions of, so what do you do next? So the supervisor's race was coming up, and everyone wanted me to run for supervisor. And there was a poll that showed I would win that race. And you should run, and I had elected officials, business leaders, everybody, and I was like, I just finished a race for 2 years. Any of the issues where they were critical of me is just going to carry on over. I don't know, how you, and I didn't, as I said before, when anyone asked me what was the job I wanted to do, it was mayor. It wasn't all these other jobs. I would have liked, and I think I would do a good job, but that was really hard for that 6 months because it did not allow me until I made kind of the final decision of I'm not going to do this. It was very hard to move on to something else because of that. I joke about the the Cube, which I'm so excited to be part of, and Discovery Cube, and they had come to me right after the mayor's race to see if I wanted to run the Cube, and I was very flattered, and they said, we just want somebody who's going to use it. I said, look, I'm flattered, and I will help you no matter what. I will consult, I will serve on your board, I will do whatever. I believe in this children's museum. I said, but I'm going to give you an analogy. I said, I feel like I just got divorced and the first person I meet wants to marry me. And I said, I want a date. You know, I've gone from a job on a Friday, which every job I had, I left on Friday, I went on Monday. I had no break in between, literally, from every job. So I'd really like to just, you know, figure out what I want to be when I grow up, and to do that, and how I use my voice. And I think that's been still even the biggest challenge, is where do you, when you've come from these different elected positions, how do you have that same voice again without being elected? And you know, when I ran for Congress, which was not something, again, I anticipated, but it was an unusual situation where Henry Waxman suddenly decided he wasn't going to run. I had good name ID in that area, and there was I was hopeful we'd have a Democratic president again, and there'd be a lot that we could do and take back the House. And it was a short period of time. And my family was in, you know, we had a family discussion about, should we do this again? And so. And
how did that go?
Yeah, the discussion was with my son. My husband was good with it. You know, it was, again, been incredibly supportive. My son was fine with it. He did not want to move to DC, which I said we would not. But we told him, even though you are not required to live in the district when you run for Congress, or when you are a Congress member. You could literally, you know, be a Congress member in San Diego and live in Los Angeles. Legally, you couldn't. Right. And so even though we were like a half a mile from the border, I said, you know what, I don't want it to be an issue. We're going to move. That was when my son was like, no, we are not, you're not running. That's what he said, you're not. And I was like, well, we're not making this decision based on where we live or whatever, and you still go to your same school, and, you know, we'll figure this out. And anyways, he came around, my husband, and he went looking at houses. He found houses that had bigger rooms, own little bathroom, you know, thing attached. You know, he was, okay, I could do this for a little bit of time. So he was a trooper. He was a real trooper, and got over that little hump and to do that. But we did, you know, we did talk about it. And I think that's important when you're running. And for me, he had it easier because he never knew anything different, because I had him when I was elected. For I think when people are deciding to run for office and their kids are 3 or 4 or whatever the age is, it's harder when they're expecting and they've seen the parent home so many nights a week, and they don't understand what's changed, why this now.
Right. So how was it to go from one election? I mean, you had a little bit of a break, but yeah, you really pretty much had to ramp it up.
Sometimes that's easier, because you just kind of, you get back into the groove, and how you raise your money, and how you're able to do that. And again, very similar to the mayor's race and controller, which is the district is so large, it's very hard to do the door-to-door, and I like the interaction with people. That piece of it is, to me, the best way, and why I liked being a city council member too, because you have that direct interaction. And I think even with mayor, when you ultimately become the mayor, then you can have that as well, to be able to do that. But I think that, you know, both of those experiences of losing, you know, showed me there's also life after being an elected official. And I'm not opposed to running for something again, but it would have to be what I want to do and where I could actually make a difference. I never ran because I wanted to be an elected official. There are nice perks to that, but it's not all it's cracked up to be. And so I've enjoyed in my current position of being vice chair of the board of the Discovery Cube L.A. and helping both in Orange County and Los Angeles, and now serving on the L.A. Homeless Service Authority, which is the commission that is helping on the homeless issue, which is so important here. And I serve on a variety of other boards. I'm enjoying that piece of life, which having a voice and I've been helping Hillary Clinton and raising money and going to different places across the country. walking precincts for her and doing that, those are the ways I can continue to make a mark.
Had you become a member of Congress, what excited you about that job?
Well, I think that there was some synergy in with some of the Democrats that I knew were there that were going up in the leadership, and the excitement, I have to say, because I worked for the Clintons and supporting Hillary Clinton, that her being president and that there would be some incredible things we could do together, and particularly on housing and economic development that I cared deeply about, coming from the HUD world. So that I saw that there were so many critical issues facing this country that having someone who was going to be a leader. You know, I go back to, we talked about how it was after the mayor's race, and one of the other things that I really had hoped to do was to break that glass ceiling. The same with Christine, I'm going to say Christine O'Donnell, but that's her name, Christine, who was running for mayor of New York against my friend, Bill de Blasio. But, you know, here there would have been the first woman mayor, and being able to use that voice to say our time has come on so many things, that felt like a loss to me. It felt really, that was hard because so many young women had put their interest in me. I still meet girls who were in junior high and high school who did phone banking for me, and I was there and I was so excited that you could potentially win, and what they would have done. So like I said, I think the hardest part for me was the people that I let down because I didn't get them elected. I don't know if, I'm sure men feel that same way, but I felt it was more of a maternal instinct than anything else. And that, you know, making those phone calls those days after was harder.
Sure.
Yeah.
What effect do you think it'll have if Hillary Clinton becomes president on women's political aspirations?
I personally think it's going to be huge because, and I hate even using that word anymore, which I want to take it out of our, after Donald Trump, no one wants to use the word huge anymore. But I think that it's not only that her getting elected, but how she governs. Because I do believe that she is one of those people that knows how to get the job done. And when I think of people I model after, that I learned from or watched, you know, the Dianne Feinsteins of the world, the Barbara Boxers of the world, the Hillary Clintons of the world, again, I see them all as problem solvers. And so when she gets in, I think the lasting impact she's going to have, and that we can say, you know what, we've helped elect the first woman president. But there's still people who have a hard time voting and going in and saying, I'm going to vote for, you know, a woman president. I don't think our younger people do as much. And in fact, you've seen that in the debates on the Bernie Hillary, you know, young people that are choosing one or the other, where it doesn't seem to matter as much to them. And for those of us that are a little older, it matters a lot because we know that there's that ultimate, still that glass ceiling. And there was a article written recently by someone who said she was an Obama person in 2008, and she could see the Hillary people coming from miles away because they were the feminist, you know, just really, you know, angry women who were coming in, and we all had to vote for her, blah, blah, blah. And she said, she would just go, oh, I don't get it. You know, we've come a long way. It's not the same. And she said, now, I think she's like 35, she's experienced some of the things that the women talked about, of that there's that glass ceiling. So let's break it. And I always said to people, do not vote for me just because I'm the woman. Do not, because there are a lot of women I wouldn't vote for. But do vote for me if you have two qualified people that are pretty dang close to each other. Why not the woman? Why not? Right. To be able to break that ceiling. And I think that's important.
Do you consider yourself a feminist?
Yes. However, I didn't used to. I probably fit in that category. You know, I was in college. I would have never called myself a feminist. I saw those are the, you know, for lack of a better term, you know, the women who didn't shave or, you know, didn't, you know, they wore all the wacky stuff, whatever. That's what I saw as a feminist. And as I grew older and had my own experience, I was like, yeah, I'm a feminist in this way and that way. And I tell this other story. It's kind of embarrassing, but I remember, and it's something you kind of put in the back of your mind that you suddenly, it just comes to the front of your mind. I was speaking at a girls' event and, encouraging them about how I did and what, and then, I said, you can do anything, and times have changed. And then I said, this just popped in my head. When I was in in high school, I was voted most likely to be President of the United States, most likely to succeed, all those things. And someone said to me, so are you ever going to run for office? And my response was, no, I'm going to marry someone who's a Congress member. And I actually said that. And I look back on that and I think, I hope no young girl ever thinks that that's the way you get into politics, into government, and can make a difference. And I don't think it was anything my mother said to me, but it was what I saw, because she was so independent in what she did. But it was like a brick wall that I kind of, a brick that hit my face and said, I actually said that. And so I do call myself a feminist now. I did not growing up.
These are my women in politics questions.
Okay.
Kind of near the end. In what ways do you think women are judged differently from men in political office? I mean, you've touched on some of this, so I just want to make sure if we have any other.
Well, I think, and just to recap some of the things, I mean, one, they're judged differently in how they govern in their leadership style, and critical about, can they be tough enough? Also, can they be more easily influenced than others? I definitely think, again, about what you wear and how you look. That is just still there, no matter what. And I had people when I was running for mayor. You need to change your hair to do this. My friends and consultants, and I would just like, oh, I can't believe But I succumbed to some of it, and I got it, and I said, okay, I know I have to do this. And I teased, women who run for office they have at least an hour to 2 hours a day that they get wasted because they have to do their hair and their makeup and all these other things where the guys don't have to do that at all. You're going on a TV show, you've got to do all that before you go on because you won't look the same if you don't. And so I think that they're just more critical about your abilities too. And do you have the experience, because maybe you haven't been able to get to that next rung of the ladder because, again, of some kind of discrimination based on being a woman.
Yeah. Why do you think there are still so few women in elected office?
So there's a lot of reasons for that, and some I've touched on. But one is the fear, of, can I win? And if I lose, women don't always, if they lose, run again. 2, if I am running for office, can I raise the money? And how do I ask, and how do I, take someone telling me no? I always say, call them back again and ask them again. Or if they don't return your phone call them 10 times, and on the 10th call, they will respond to you. Just do it. That's how everyone else, the expectation has to be that they're going to give you money. I think the other is, women, many women who do want to get married and have children, whatever they want to be able to do, that is a barrier to them. Because you see in some of the older generation, most women ran for office after they had their kids. There's a group that did it when they had their children, but those are usually, the exception and not the rule. I mean, I'm only the 3rd woman in the history of the city council to have a child while in office. Roz Wyman was the first, 60 plus years ago, probably now. Gloria Molina was the 2nd, which was, probably 28, 30 years ago. It's it's kind of a surprise in that we don't have more women who are in that place.
No, I agree. Why do you think it's so important for women to be involved in politics?
I think women have a unique perspective and an ability to solve those problems, bring the people to the table, cut through the BS, and bring their own experiences that they've had. at every single level. And it's not just about being a parent. I mean, I obviously talk a lot about that because at the time I went through it, it was so blatant to me that people were giving me their opinions. And when you're a politician, people believe they can say anything to you. There's no, for whatever reason, there's no screen that they would never have said that to somebody else. But you're a politician, I can almost say anything to you and be critical of you, and it doesn't matter. Well, it does. I mean, you can feel it, and it goes with you in your decision making going forward. So I think that women are going to be better advocates. And I would never want to have a city council that was all women either. You just have to have a good balance, and we make up more than 50% of the population, and having only one woman on the city council. The other problem is mentoring and bringing women to the table and bringing them up like the guys do, and setting it up that they're going to be the person to take your seat, and getting them prepared and supporting them. And so it's why I've supported organizations like Stop the Gap that's been helping on the state legislature. It's why I've supported and serve on the board of Emerge California. That, you know, that kind of training is really important, and I go and speak to them and tell them the good, the bad, and the ugly about what it means to organizations, entities. Mount St. Mary's has had a program about running, women running, and have a weekend kind of activity. We've been talking to US. There's so many places that are happening, and if they invite me, I go, because I want to share what my experiences have been, and also want to be clear about it is okay to lose, because that's the other part that people come to me oftentimes. Well, how do you feel? What is, you know? And I'm okay. But they're putting their own kind of feelings of what would happen. I said, it's just like losing, you not getting the job that you wanted. Now, true, mine's on the front page of the LA Times, and so that's very different. And I'm still wanting someone to look at the stories, and it can't be me, and I think it would just be painful for me too, to go back and look at all of the stories that were written in the race and compare them from a gender perspective and language that is used, and positive versus negative, and how that went, because, you know, get my husband started and he'll tell you of who, you know, who was not fair on some of that. But, you know, you could tell by the questions they asked that they were going against. I had a reporter who emailed me questions and said things like, why did you choose to put your family, you know, in front in the election and your opponent did not? Well, that immediately means you think what I did was wrong. And all of them, and my husband's like, we're not doing this interview. You know, if they want to do an interview about our family, fine, but not if it's going to be a way that suggests you have harmed us because of this.
What would you tell a young woman who wants to run for office today?
My first response was going to be, do it, which is still there. But I think behind that is, ask yourself that real question, which is, why do you want to do it? Because if you don't have a good answer to that, you're going to go through a lot that challenges your inner core, and you have to know that you're doing this for the right reasons and why, and to be able to articulate that, and then be able to know that there's going to be a lot of pitfalls, but there'll be a lot of highs too. There'll be a lot of things that you're going to be able to accomplish. There's going to be people, as I said, that amaze you and come to your side, and you think, wow, I can't believe that person did that. And so I would encourage young women, because if you want to change public policy, if you want to change the future of this country and where we're going and all the problems that are facing, which is, you know, if you talk about homeless and income inequality, and you talk about job creation, women are at the forefront of solving those problems. You may or may not see them on the front page of the papers, but let me tell you, they're there and they're doing it. Those small entrepreneurs, the fastest growing, are women-owned businesses. The women who are serving on the commission that I'm serving on, LASA Commission, are the dynamos that are saying, here's how we're going to solve this problem, and we're not going to sit back and accept it anymore. And then you have people like Nuri Martinez, who, as the sole woman, is just, you know, carrying the torch for so many of us. And we would all do whatever we could to help her. And we have to create that bench of women to take the place of the women who have come before them.
Couple more questions. What are you most proud of in your political career?
So hard. So, and I count my political career not just when I was elected, and I would say the creation of LA's Best, because the tens of thousands and probably now hundreds of thousands of kids who have gone through that LA's Best program, because we decided that the school district needed to be our partner, and when Tom Bradley went to them and said, we want to open these after-school programs at 10 of your schools, and they told him no, he said, no's not the right answer, and we're not giving up. And so that tenacity and that creation of something from the get-go and to see it today is pretty amazing. To be able to say, I had something to do with that, and I had something to do with it when I wasn't elected, although I was working for elected, when I was a city council member, and then now even as a private citizen, to be able to support their expansion and what they're doing is pretty special. And I think the other thing I just want to say in that, the leadership that I saw in Tom Bradley on that issue, when he met with Mayor Reardon the day after the election, when Reardon was elected, he talked to him about two things. I can't remember the second thing, but I remember the one thing because Tom Bradley called me to tell me, because I happened to be in Washington that week finalizing my new job with Andrew Cuomo. And he had called me to tell me that if I didn't want to work for Andrew, that Reardon wanted to hire me, and I was like, I'm kind of committed. And he said, and I want you to know that I told Dick Reardon that one of the two things he must do is continue LA's Best, that this is not just my program. This is not just the Tom Bradley LA's Best program. It's the city's LA's Best program, and that every mayor subsequently should do the same. And that's happened. Every mayor then, it was set because those two sat down and said, this is important. And I think when you talk about leadership, it's not about the credit that you get or the names you have on something. It's about the lives that you touched. And that goes back to the real reason why you run for office, is that you can point to, I helped that homeless person that when I helped that mentally ill facility get built in the early 90s, that wouldn't have been there, or the senior center I helped as a city council member, or the rape victims who may not know my name, but their rape kit got tested because I didn't take no for an answer. And I think that's the philosophy you should go with as an elected official, and particularly as a woman, because you will get told no, whether it's you running for office, whether it's what position you're going to take, or the problem you want to solve, and it just says, I've got the courage to knock through those doors.
So what have been your main priorities since in your, I don't want to call it your post-political life, but whatever, your life after your most recent campaign?
Yeah. So I think my priorities have been, one was to get the Discovery Cube L.A. open. This facility's history is one in which it sat vacant from 2006 to it was opened in 2014. And it was operated by another entity that ultimately had to close the doors. They never opened it as a children's museum. There were no exhibits, built the building. And when they came to me, I thought, if I can help make this happen, it's another cause that I truly believe in. And so when I see kids run through the doors and enjoy it, and the buses out front, I think, wow, this was something that people again said couldn't be done. It's not going to succeed, and it has. And when the mayor asked me to serve on the Homeless Commission, which is not a paid position, my husband and I laugh about how many things we do that are just because we care about them. I thought, I also have a unique perspective of working on the federal level and in government, and can help push this, and value that he thought I had, something to give on that particular issue. So between that and the Cube, and with helping women get elected, including supporting Hillary Clinton, that's a pretty busy schedule, in addition to spending a little bit more time with my son, who I told him, you may rue the day that I didn't become mayor of Los Angeles, because I'm gonna, be around more. But I think if you're the kind of person that's involved, you're involved whether you're an elected official or not. And so my post life is one in which I encourage people to do the same thing I did, which is run for office and to be in office, and encourage people who want to change their community to step up and use their voice, and then to figure out for me when those times are that I can be helpful and useful. And then it's okay to read the LA Times and know that your name's not in the paper. It's actually good sometimes to know that you can just read it and say, hey, maybe that's something I can do or help. And as I look forward in my next career, it's finding that right thing where the voice is going to be useful. I had so many job offers that were great jobs, but they weren't what I believed in. And every job, as I've described today, was one that I woke up in the morning and said, I love my job and I love what I do and I'm passionate about it, and if I have to work till 9 o'clock at night, I will do that. I have to take my kid with me, I will do that because I believe in it. And so that's what I feel about the Cube here and the Homeless Commission, and whatever my next kind of full-time gig going forward too, it's got to have those components to it that allow me to continue kind of the pathway I've had.
Is there anything else you would like to add, or
I don't know. I feel like I've been like chatting so much, and
well, it was great. I really appreciate you
if I
sharing
missed
it
anything.
all.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.